For decades, the story of Alzheimer's has just been one of heartbreak and total frustration, a disease that just moves in one direction with nothing to slow it down. But after years of failures and false starts, the headlines are suddenly buzzing. So are we really at a turning point in the fight against this disease? Let's dive in.
First, to really get a sense of what we're up against, just look at this number. 55 million people around the world are living with dementia right now, and Alzheimer's is the #1 cause. It's a staggering figure, and it's only going to get bigger as we all live longer, which makes finding a treatment more urgent than ever.
And for the longest time, it really felt like the field was just stuck. For nearly 20 years, there was just this deafening silence when it came to new drugs. One trial after another just failed. But that long, frustrating drought, well, it's finally over.
What's so exciting about what's happening right now is that the progress is coming on two critical fronts at the exact same time. It's not just about the new drugs themselves, but also about these revolutionary new ways to diagnose the disease way earlier and much more easily than ever before.
So what are these new treatments that are making all the headlines? They are a class of drugs called amyloid-directed antibodies, and the way they work is actually pretty cool. Think of them like a highly specialized cleanup crew for your brain, designed to go in, find those sticky amyloid plaques that are a hallmark of Alzheimer's and clear them out.
All right, let's look at the two big players here. Lecanemab, which is sold as Leqembi, and donanemab, sold as Kisunla. As you can see, they're pretty similar in some ways. Both are given through an IV, just on a slightly different schedule. And then you see the cost. Yeah, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars a year for either one.
And this right here, this is the other half of the breakthrough, the diagnostics. For years, the only way to confirm you had these amyloid plaques was to get an invasive spinal tap or a super expensive PET scan. Now, we are right on the verge of simple blood tests. This is a total game changer. It could open the door to cheap, widespread screening for the very first time.
But with all this incredible news, you gotta ask the big question, right? How much is this real tangible hope, and how much is just hype? The headlines sound amazing, but do the numbers actually tell the whole story? Let's dig in.
This is the number, 27%. You've probably seen it everywhere. For lecanemab, a reported 27% slowing of cognitive decline. And on the surface, that sounds incredible, right? A huge win. But what does that 27% actually mean for a patient day-to-day? Well, the study used an 18-point scale to measure dementia, where a higher score is worse. And on that scale, the 27% improvement boiled down to a difference of just 0.45 points after a year and a half of treatment. So the real question is a change that small even noticeable? To answer that, we need to understand this one key idea, the minimal clinically important difference, or MCID. It sounds technical, but it's simple. It's the smallest change on a clinical scale that you or your family or your doctor would actually notice in your daily life. It's the threshold for what feels like a real change.
And this is where the rubber really meets the road. For lecanemab, the effect was 0.45 points, but the bar for a noticeable change is 1 point. For donanemab, the effect was 3.4 points, but the bar for what's perceptible is somewhere between 5 and 9 points. So in both cases, the average benefit, well, it falls below the threshold for what's typically considered a meaningful, real-world difference.
Which brings us right to the heart of this whole debate. The effect is statistically real, there's no doubt about that. But is it a difference that patients and their families can actually feel? On average, the data suggests probably not.
And look, that question about such small benefits gets even tougher when you turn your attention to the other side of the coin, the risks. And they are very, very real. So let's take a closer look at the safety data.
The #1 safety issue with these new drugs is a side effect known as ARIA-II. What is that? Simply put, it's brain swelling or brain bleeding. Yeah, it's a serious complication, and it's directly tied to how these drugs actually work.
And we are not talking about some rare side effect here. Just look at these numbers from the clinical trials. For donanemab, a whopping 89% of patients experience some kind of treatment-related adverse event. 89%. For lecanemab, it was 45%. And tragically, in both trials, some of these events were fatal.
So what does ARIA actually feel like for a patient? Well, the symptoms can be anything from headaches, confusion, and dizziness to really severe things like vision changes, nausea, and even seizures. The risk is so significant that the FDA has recommended this incredibly intensive monitoring schedule. Look at this plan for lecanemab. 5 separate brain MRIs within the first year of treatment alone. This just shows you this is a major medical undertaking, not some simple, easy therapy.
This really puts the risk into stark perspective. There's a metric called the number needed to harm. It asks a simple question. How many people do you have to treat for one person to have a bad outcome? For these drugs, that number is about 3. Think about that. For every 3 patients treated, 1 will suffer an adverse event.
So, where does all this leave us? You've got these modest, often unnoticeable benefits on one hand, and these pretty significant, common risks on the other. What's the path forward in the fight against Alzheimer's?
Well, this quote from an expert panel really seems to point the way. It says there's a growing consensus that combination therapy will be needed. The idea is that a single drug targeting just amyloid probably isn't the silver bullet. The future is likely going to involve hitting the disease from multiple angles at once.
Okay, so let's just pull the key takeaways together. After a 20-year desert, new amyloid drugs are finally here. But their benefit, while it's statistically real, is clinically pretty small, often too small for a patient to actually feel. And that tiny benefit has to be weighed against serious and common risks, like brain swelling and bleeding. At the end of the day, it looks like these drugs aren't the final answer, but maybe just one early piece of a much bigger puzzle. And that leaves us with the billion-dollar question. Are these imperfect, risky, and expensive drugs a crucial first step on a very long road, something that finally gets the ball rolling? Or are they a costly distraction that could cause real harm and divert precious resources away from better ideas? Honestly, the debate is only just beginning.